General Hospital spoilers for Wednesday, July 16 reveal that Curtis was never a man who let obsessions consume him, not until recently. Ever since the shadow surrounding Jacinda's disappearance began to tighten around him, Curtis has felt something primal awaken inside. The once calm, measured man now finds himself spiraling into a storm of paranoia, vengeance, and obsession that he can barely recognize. And the most alarming part? He's no longer trying to pull himself out of it. Instead, he's diving deeper. Drew, a man who once stood in Curtis's circle as a trusted friend, is now the target of his most unrelenting suspicions. Every instinct Curtis once used to hunt criminals, to protect the innocent, is now laser-focused on one goal, exposing Drew. And Stella, ever the grounding presence in his life, senses the danger long before anyone else. Curtis has been trying to keep Stella close, not out of love, not out of familial warmth, but out of control. He knows that if Stella drifts too far, if she gets too much information or sees too much of his unraveling mind, she might be the one to stop him. She might be the one to pull him back from the brink. And that's not something Curtis wants, not anymore. He's found a purpose in this obsession, and he's clinging to it like a lifeline. But Stella's presence threatens to shine a light on the madness he's nurturing in secret. So, instead, he puts on a performance. He reassures her, flatters her, convinces her that everything is under control. But behind his calm words is a mind that's racing, a heart that's fueled by something far darker than truth, revenge. It all began with Jacinda. Her disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was a rupture. She was supposed to testify, to come clean about what she knew. And then she was gone. Just like that. No warning. No trace. Curtis had seen this pattern before, people silenced before they could speak. But this time, it wasn't the mob or an enemy across state lines. This time, Curtis was convinced the threat was internal. And all roads, in his mind, led to Drew. The former soldier, the man with too many blank spaces in his past, the one with government ties and emotional armor. Drew had always carried secrets. But Curtis now believed one of those secrets was Jacinda's fate. Curtis's investigation started small. Background checks, phone records, chance conversations. But then it escalated. Security footage, surveillance, falsified badges to access restricted areas. Curtis broke every rule he once upheld. He justified each line he crossed by saying he was looking for justice. But Stella saw the change. She saw how his hands shook when he thought no one was looking. She heard the clipped tone in his voice when someone questioned his theories. She knew this wasn't about closure anymore. This was about fixation. Every time Curtis tried to let go, the obsession came back stronger. There was something about Drew's perfect posture, his calm explanations, his refusal to react with anything other than diplomatic charm. It all felt too clean, too rehearsed. And Curtis couldn't shake the image of Jacinda, scared, desperate, on the verge of revealing something monumental. Whatever she knew, Curtis was certain Drew didn't want it coming out. And now she was gone. That wasn't coincidence. That was strategy. The more Curtis pushed, the more isolated he became. Friends began to avoid him. Colleagues hesitated before returning his calls. Even Jordan, always willing to give Curtis the benefit of the doubt, started questioning whether his vendetta was clouding his reason. But Stella stayed. She hovered just close enough to monitor him, just far enough not to trigger confrontation. She knew what was happening. Curtis was transforming. He was no longer the man who listened before judging, the man who sought peace before war. He was becoming consumed. His days were filled with theories. His nights were haunted by imaginary scenarios, Jacinda gagged and tied, Drew standing over her with cold detachment. None of it proven. None of it rational. But all of it felt real to Curtis. And in his mind, Stella was his last threat. The one person who could dismantle the twisted logic he'd built to justify his actions. That's why he kept her close. Fed her half-truths. Swore he was stepping back when he was only digging deeper. Because if Stella ever truly understood how far he was willing to go, she might try to stop him. And Curtis wasn't ready to be stopped. There's a new obsession rising in Port Charles. It's not about love or power. It's about uncovering a truth that may not even exist. Curtis is chasing a ghost. And Drew, whether innocent or not, is trapped in the crosshairs of a man unraveling under the weight of his own suspicions. Stella is watching. Waiting. Hoping that whatever is left of the man she loves can survive the storm he's created. But each day, that hope grows dimmer. Because Curtis isn't searching for justice anymore. He's searching for vindication. And that's the most dangerous mission of all. Trina sat in the quiet corner of the park, her phone clenched tightly in her hand, knuckles white. Lips trembling from a mixture of rage and heartbreak. The summer wind did little to cool the fire building in her chest. She had just come from what should have been a normal evening, a quiet dinner with Kai, a few laughs, a soft kiss goodbye, but instead, it ended with a truth she could no longer unsee. Her heart pounded as she replayed the scene in her mind, over and over again, as if punishing herself would somehow bring clarity. She had seen it. The messages. The proof. Kai, her Kai, had betrayed her. The boy who had looked her in the eye and promised her loyalty had been hiding something that unraveled every thread of trust they had ever built. When Jocelyn arrived, Trina didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes, the way they shimmered with held-back tears. The way her shoulders curled inward as though trying to shield herself from the pain, told Jocelyn everything she needed to know. Something was wrong. Badly wrong. Joss sat beside her in silence. Letting the moment breathe, letting her best friend gather the strength to speak. Trina finally did, in a whisper, not looking up. She told Joss everything. The story poured out of her, raw. Fragmented, punctuated by gasps of disbelief and pauses where words failed her. She spoke of the signs she had ignored. The nights Kai had fallen asleep early. The moments he pulled away when she reached for his phone. The excuses. The charm he used to deflect suspicion. Trina had convinced herself it was nothing. That she was just being paranoid. That love meant trusting. But love, she realized now, also meant protecting your own heart, and her heart had just been shattered. What made it worse wasn't just that Kai had betrayed her, it was how he had done it. The betrayal wasn't a drunken kiss or a moment of weakness. It was methodical. Hidden. Built over weeks. The messages were with someone she didn't even know. Someone who had been part of his life all along, just beneath the surface. And it was clear from his words that this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. When Trina told Joss she had already broken up with him, no tears, no arguments, just a cold, decisive goodbye, Jocelyn could hardly process it. Shock hit her like a tidal wave. She had always seen Trina and Kai as one of the few stable couples left in Port Charles. They had been through so much together. They had survived family pressure, emotional baggage. Even dangerous twists of fate. If they could fall apart, what hope did anyone have? Joss couldn't hide the ache she felt, both for Trina and for herself. She was stunned, not just by the betrayal, but by the way Trina delivered it with such calm finality. It wasn't like her to shut down so quickly. It wasn't like her to walk away without fighting. But Trina wasn't just walking away from Kai, she was walking away from who she had been with him. The girl who forgave too easily. The girl who compromised her boundaries to keep someone else comfortable. That girl was gone. What replaced her was someone harder. Sharper. More aware. Joss saw it and felt the weight of the change. She reached out and took Trina's hand, not offering advice, not asking questions, just anchoring her with presence. There would be time for processing later, for rage, for healing. For figuring out what came next. But in that moment, all Trina needed was someone who would sit with her in the ruins of her trust and not try to clean it up too quickly. Kai's betrayal marked a turning point not just in Trina's romantic life but in her evolution as a woman. It was a line crossed that could not be uncrossed. And for Jocelyn, it was a wake-up call. That even those who seem perfect, those who say the right things, show up on time, hold your hand in the dark, can still choose dishonesty. The betrayal didn't just shake Trina. It shook their whole idea of what relationships should be. And that ripple would spread far beyond tonight. But in the silence between words, in the grip of hands and the shared breath of pain, one truth remained: Trina wasn't alone. Jocelyn was with her. And whatever came next, whatever healing, confrontation, or closure would be required, they would face it together. Because that's what best friends do. Even when love breaks, friendship doesn't. And in the ashes of betrayal, that was the only thing Trina could hold on to. Drew had been moving in silence for weeks, carefully laying the groundwork for a revelation that would not only shift the balance in Port Charles but also fracture two of the town's most emotionally delicate alliances. Beneath his calm demeanor and diplomatic public presence, Drew was hiding something monumental, an elaborate plan he had been orchestrating behind closed doors. One that had the potential to blow apart the already fragile relationship between Willow and Nina. And today, that moment had finally arrived. The time had come for Drew to reveal what he had kept to himself for far too long, and when he did, the emotional fallout was immediate and devastating. For a long time, Drew had been watching the tension between Willow and Nina simmer just beneath the surface. Their fragile truce, built on desperate hope and shared trauma, was always on the verge of collapse. Drew knew that a single truth, buried, ugly, and loaded with implications, could shatter the illusion they'd tried to maintain. And he knew that revealing it would make him the catalyst. The villain in their eyes, even if he saw himself as a man doing what had to be done. The truth Drew had uncovered wasn't just scandalous, it was surgical in its impact. It connected financial fraud, hidden medical records, and a betrayal that went far beyond any personal vendetta. Somewhere in the maze of legal documents, whistleblower testimony, and confidential reports, Drew found something Nina had tried very hard to keep buried. Something Willow had a right to know. And as much as Drew wrestled with whether to reveal it, the decision was ultimately made for him, because someone else was getting close to exposing it first. If he didn't take control of the story, someone far less sympathetic would. When Drew gathered them both, Willow and Nina, neither woman suspected what was coming. Nina, always cautious, sensed Drew's tone had changed. But she assumed it had more to do with business than blood. Willow, ever hopeful, thought perhaps Drew was there to mediate peace between mother and daughter. But then Drew dropped the weight of his discovery on the table like a live grenade. The room fell into suffocating silence. Willow's face went pale. The kind of pale that comes from having the ground yanked out from beneath you. Her hands trembled, her voice caught in her throat. Nina, meanwhile, could barely breathe. Because what Drew exposed wasn't just another secret, it was a truth that, if made public, could ruin reputations, cost careers, and undo every fragile step toward reconciliation. Drew had discovered that Nina had manipulated a medical board official months earlier, using her connections to delay critical information about a genetic blood disorder, a condition that, if revealed in time, could have spared Willow weeks of unnecessary suffering during her transplant crisis. Nina had done it, Drew believed, to protect her own name and image, fearing that another scandal tied to her would destroy her already tarnished reputation. But in doing so, she had risked her daughter's life. Whether Nina had known the full implications at the time didn't matter to Willow now. The betrayal was there, etched in paperwork and digital records. It was undeniable. As Willow stood there, processing the depth of the betrayal, she felt something fracture inside her, something permanent. She had tried so hard to rebuild something with Nina, to find meaning in their twisted path to motherhood and daughterhood. She had forgiven, again and again, hoping love could replace what had been stolen from them. But now, with this revelation, that hope collapsed. All she could see was the woman who once withheld her identity now withholding her survival. Nina, on the other hand, was in shock. Not just from being exposed, but from the realization that someone she once considered an ally had been digging into her life so thoroughly. Drew's betrayal cut deep, not because it was wrong, but because it was precise. He had chosen this moment. He had chosen her moment of fragile reconciliation with Willow to destroy it. And in her heart, Nina knew it was over. Not just her relationship with Willow, but the fragile mask she wore for the sake of civility. Drew, for his part, stood calm, even as the air around him burned. He didn't gloat. He didn't explain further. He simply watched as the truth did what he always knew it would, expose the cracks everyone else tried to pretend weren't there. He had no illusions about being forgiven. But he also knew he had done what no one else was willing to do, force the truth into the light. And in Port Charles, that kind of truth always comes with a price. Jason stood in the shadows of the hallway just outside Sasha's apartment, shoulders tense, jaw clenched, heart heavier than it had been in months. The silence pressed down on him like a judgment, weighing every breath as he prepared for a conversation he had avoided for too long. But the time had come. The world around him was shifting, Britt's sudden reappearance, the resurgence of old enemies, and the emergence of a new mission had thrown him into a storm he could no longer control. And in the eye of that storm was Sasha. Unaware that everything she believed about their quiet exit from Port Charles was about to change. Jason wasn't just wrestling with logistics anymore, he was battling an obsession. A haunting sense that if he didn't act now, everything around him would collapse. Including Sasha. The knock on her door felt like a death sentence. When she opened it and saw his face, her expression softened, but Jason could see the worry flicker behind her eyes. She sensed it too, something wasn't right. The calm, steady protector she had come to rely on was cracking beneath the surface. And she was right. Jason wasn't just here to talk. He was here to dismantle the illusion they had both been clinging to. There was no clean escape anymore. There was only truth. They sat in silence for a moment before Jason finally spoke. His voice was low, deliberate. Every word like a weight he had to lift with effort. He told her that things were changing, fast. That people he thought were dead were showing up alive. That forces he couldn't name were moving in the dark corners of Port Charles, dragging up old ghosts and demanding new sacrifices. And that Britt, yes, Britt, was back. Not just as a memory. Not just as a dream, but as a living, breathing woman caught in something far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. Sasha stared at him, stunned. The name alone was enough to bring up questions, but it was the look in Jason's eyes that delivered the real blow. She could see it, the way his gaze dropped when he mentioned Britt. The flicker of guilt, of attachment, of something unresolved that Sasha had never dared to name until now. Jason wasn't just bringing her news. He was asking her to understand something that even he couldn't articulate. He was no longer sure this path they were on was the right one. He was no longer sure he could protect her. Or that she should follow him at all. The mission had changed. What began as a plan to quietly remove Sasha from the chaos of Port Charles had evolved into something far more complicated. Jason had thought he could outmaneuver the threats, anticipate the danger, shield Sasha from the worst of it. But now, everything was different. With Britt's return came 1,000 new questions, and 1,000 old emotions. And those emotions were becoming an obsession. Not just with her safety, but with the truth. With why she had disappeared. With who had helped her. And with what it all meant. Jason knew that staying silent would be easier. But he also knew silence would only make things worse. So he told Sasha the truth, not just about Britt, but about the new assignment taking shape behind the scenes. He didn't have all the details yet, but he could feel it coming. A job. A directive. One that would demand his full attention and pull him into places where Sasha could not follow. If she stayed with him, she'd be in danger. Not just physically, but emotionally. Because Jason's focus was shifting. And he didn't know if he could give her what she needed when part of him was already spiraling back into something else, something darker. Sasha tried to stay calm. But her voice trembled when she asked him the question neither of them wanted to face. Was he leaving her? Jason didn't answer immediately. Because he wasn't sure himself. What he was sure of, though, was that keeping her in his orbit while his mind and heart were elsewhere would be a betrayal far worse than walking away. He had seen too much loss, carried too many regrets. He couldn't add Sasha to that list. Not now. Not when she still had a chance to escape the mess he was about to step into. He told her that leaving Port Charles had never just been about protection, it had been about escape. But now, there was no escaping. There was only confrontation. With the past. With Britt. With the new mission that was beginning to take shape in the shadows. And if Sasha stayed with him, she'd be dragged into a war she didn't sign up for. The conversation didn't end with tears. It ended with silence. A silence that said everything. Jason stood, hesitated for just a moment, then walked out. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. And because the obsession blooming inside him, fed by secrets and shadows, was no longer something he could ignore. It was real. It was urgent. And it was leading him back to a woman he thought he'd lost, and a mission he was no longer sure he could walk away from. Port Charles wasn't done with Jason. And Jason, haunted and driven, wasn't done with it either. Michael stood at the edge of a breaking point, his mind torn between loyalty and justice, between family legacy and moral clarity. The air in Port Charles was thick with tension, every corner seemed to whisper of betrayal, of secrets teetering on the edge of revelation. The rift between Sunny and Sidwell had grown from a quiet rivalry into a smoldering war, drawing in shadows and stirring old grudges. And now, standing in the middle of it all, Michael found himself facing a decision that would not only define his own future, but potentially shatter the lives of everyone around him. The feud between Sunny and Sidwell had been simmering for months, but recently it had erupted into something far more dangerous. Sidwell's brutal tactics. The fire that nearly claimed Christina's life, and Sunny's escalating need for revenge had created a chain reaction that threatened to pull the entire Corinthos circle into collapse. But what most people didn't know, what Michael had quietly discovered, was that there was more to Sidwell's campaign than retaliation. There were alliances forming in the dark. Money changing hands. And someone inside the Corinthos organization feeding Sidwell information. Michael had kept this information to himself, watching and waiting. Hoping he could find the right way to address it without igniting further chaos. But the more he uncovered, the more impossible it became to stay silent. This wasn't just a feud between two powerful men, it was a time bomb. And someone had to decide whether to cut the wire or let it detonate. The problem was, every choice carried consequence. If Michael exposed the leak and stepped into the fray, he risked becoming a target, not just for Sidwell, but for Sunny himself. His father had grown more erratic, more consumed by vengeance. And less willing to hear reason. He wasn't the same man who had once taught Michael about loyalty and power. He was unraveling. And Michael knew that confronting Sunny now might do more harm than good. But doing nothing was no longer an option. The moment Christina barely escaped death, something changed in Michael. The fear became personal. The war wasn't staying in the shadows anymore, it was bleeding into the lives of the innocent. And the longer Sunny remained locked in his obsession with revenge, the more vulnerable the entire family became. Michael's obsession now was different. It wasn't with vengeance, or even redemption. It was with prevention. With stopping a disaster before it swallowed everyone. But that kind of clarity came with a price. He would have to betray someone. Whether it was Sunny, Sidwell, or even someone inside his own inner circle, Michael was going to have to choose whose future mattered more, and live with the consequences. What made the situation worse was that Michael had been tipped off about something big, an upcoming meeting between Sidwell and an unknown third party. A deal. One that could tip the power structure of the city completely out of balance. If it went through, Sonny's empire might not just be threatened, it could be dismantled from the inside. And if Michael didn't act, he might become complicit in its downfall. But acting would mean confrontation. With Sonny. With Drew. With everyone who believed the family was untouchable. It would mean stepping into a position of power and taking responsibility for the outcome, whatever it may be. And Michael wasn't sure he was ready for that. Not yet. But he didn't have time to wait. As the news of the upcoming meeting reached him, Michael realized the moment of decision had arrived. He would have to intercept it. He would have to confront Sonny about what he knew. Even if it meant shattering whatever fragile trust still remained between them. And if Sonny refused to listen, Michael would go around him. He would expose the truth. Take control. And face whatever storm followed. The obsession mounting inside Michael wasn't with power, or legacy, it was with the truth. With doing what was right, even if it hurt. Even if it broke the family he'd spent years trying to protect. Because sometimes, protecting people meant saving them from themselves. In that moment, Michael's transformation was complete. He was no longer the uncertain son trying to earn Sonny's respect. He was the man standing on the edge of a war, about to decide whether to light the match or blow it out. And no matter which path he chose, Port Charles would never be the same.